Rancher gave a ride to an Apache widow. By law, he became the man she must marry. John Matthews had always been used to long days on the open plains. His ranch stretched across miles of dusty, sun-baked land in the American Southwest, a place where the sky seemed endless and the wind whispered through the tall grass. He was a man of habit, waking early every morning to check on his cattle, repair fences, and ride the trails that cut through his property. Life was hard, but it was honest, and John liked it that way. He had learned early that living in these parts meant respecting the land and respecting people. On one particular morning, the sun had barely crested the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the plains. John was riding his horse along a trail that led toward a nearby settlement when he noticed something unusual in the distance. A figure was struggling near a shallow river crossing. As he drew closer, he could see it was a woman, alone, her clothes worn and dusty, her small frame tense as she tried to guide her horse across the water. The river was not deep, but the current ran faster than expected, and her horse seemed hesitant, stamping its hooves nervously. John slowed his horse and approached carefully, calling out in a calm voice, "Need some help, ma'am." The woman turned her head quickly, her dark eyes widening slightly as she studied him. There was a mix of fear and caution in her expression. She was not used to strangers in these parts, especially white men like John. Yet there was a desperation in her posture that made him certain she needed assistance. "My horse, it won't cross," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Her accent was different, soft, and unfamiliar, and John realized she was not from the settlements nearby. "Here, you can ride with me," John said, sliding down from his horse. He led hers closer and offered the reins. "I'll take you to the other side." The woman hesitated. She glanced back at the river, then at the vast stretch of land beyond it. Finally, with a small nod, she stepped onto John's horse behind him, holding tight to his waist. He could feel her tension, her unease at being so close to a man she barely knew. But there was also trust, just a small, fragile trust that he would not let harm come to her. The ride across the river was tense but uneventful. John spoke gently, trying to put her at ease. "You must have had a rough morning. Where are you headed?" The woman looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously. I need to reach the village." "It's not far, but I am alone now." Her voice trembled slightly, and John noticed a hint of sorrow behind her words. "I'll get you there," he promised. "Don't worry." As they rode, John noticed the weight of her burden. She carried a small bundle of belongings tied in a cloth, and he could see that her clothes were patched in several places. There was a quiet dignity in her demeanor, despite the hardship she had clearly endured. He sensed that she was not just any traveler. There was a story behind her, one that had brought her to this lonely stretch of land. "You have children?" John asked gently, trying not to seem intrusive. The woman paused before answering. "Yes, two." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "They are with my people, safe for now. I just need to reach the village." John nodded, feeling a protective instinct rising within him. He had always been alone, never married, but he had a soft spot for those who struggled to survive in this harsh land. "You'll be safe soon," he said. "The village isn't far." As they rode, he tried to make small talk, though he could tell she was not used to conversation with strangers. She was polite but reserved, giving only brief answers. Yet in those brief answers, John could sense a strength. This woman had faced loss and hardship, and somehow she continued forward, determined to survive. The trail twisted through rocky terrain, and John's horse stumbled slightly on a loose stone. He steadied himself and his passenger, and she let out a small gasp, gripping him tighter. He smiled reassuringly. "Almost there," he said. "Just a little further." Finally, after what felt like an eternity for her, the trees of the village came into view. It was a small settlement on the edge of the plains, surrounded by simple wooden homes and the sounds of people starting their day. Children ran along the paths, women carried water, and men prepared for the day's work. John slowed his horse and guided them to a safe spot near the village's edge. The woman slid off his horse, her legs shaking slightly from the ride. She held her bundle close and took a deep breath. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes meeting his for the first time fully. There was a quiet gratitude in her gaze, a recognition of the kindness he had shown. John tipped his hat. "No trouble, be safe now." As she turned to enter the village, John noticed that the elders were watching her, their faces serious. They whispered among themselves, glancing in his direction. John had no idea why, but something about their expression made him uneasy. He had helped her, that was all. Yet the intensity of their gaze suggested there was more at play here, something he did not yet understand. Later, as John prepared to leave, a man from the village approached him. He was older, with deep lines etched into his face, wearing traditional clothing that marked him as an elder. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "You have helped our widow," the elder said. "By our law, this action brings a responsibility," John frowned. "Responsibility? I just gave her a ride across the river, that's all." The elder's eyes were steady, serious. "In our custom, a man who aids a widow during her first journey after her husband's death is bound to her. You are now, by our law, the one she must marry." John blinked, stunned. He had never heard of such a law. He tried to reason with the man. "I am not of your people. I do not follow your customs. Surely this cannot apply to me." The elder's expression did not waver. "It applies because you have acted. The law is not about where you come from, but about what you have done. The choice was yours, and now the path is set. You must decide if you will honor it." John felt a wave of disbelief. He had only wanted to help a woman in need, to offer her safety. Now, without warning, he was caught in a law that bound him to a life he had never imagined. He thought of the woman, strong, dignified, brave, and wondered what she would say if she knew he had no choice in the matter. That night, John sat outside his small cabin, staring at the stars. The land was quiet, the wind rustling softly through the grass. He thought of the woman, her small bundle, the children she had mentioned, and the elder's words. The responsibility weighed on him, heavy and unfamiliar. He had lived a life of freedom, making his own choices, and yet here was a law he could not escape, a bond he had not sought but now could not deny. Sleep was uneasy that night. John dreamed of the river, of the woman's eyes, and of the village elders' solemn faces. The wide-open plains that had always been a place of comfort now felt like a vast trap. He wondered how he could reconcile his own desires with the law he had unintentionally entered. Morning came with the golden light of dawn spilling over the horizon. John saddled his horse and rode toward the village once again, determined to understand the situation fully. As he approached, he saw the woman at the edge of the settlement, looking out toward the plains. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. She turned as he approached, and for a moment neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary, both understood the gravity of what had just begun. John finally broke the silence. "I want to understand. I don't want to disrespect your customs, but I need to know what this means." The woman nodded slowly. "It is our way," she said. "I must follow it, or my family and my people will suffer shame. You are part of it now, whether you wish it or not." John swallowed hard. He had helped her, but now that act had entwined their lives in ways he had never expected. He realized that the story of a simple ride across a river was only the beginning. Ahead lay challenges, misunderstandings, and perhaps something he could not yet name. A bond born not of choice, but of circumstance, law, and honor. The first part of John and Nayeli's story ended not with certainty, but with a question. Could two people from different worlds, brought together by chance and law, find respect, trust, and perhaps even friendship in a situation neither had sought? The plains were wide, the trail uncertain, and the journey had only just begun. After the first tense encounter, John Matthews felt a heaviness in his chest that he had never known before. Helping someone across a river was something he thought nothing of, but now he realized that one simple act had changed the course of his life in ways he could not have imagined. The weight of the Apache law hung over him, a responsibility he had not sought but could not ignore. As he walked through the village that morning, he noticed the elders watching him carefully, their eyes steady and deliberate. He could sense their expectations, and it made him uneasy. Nayeli, the widow he had helped, moved quietly among her people. She carried herself with dignity, yet there was a subtle tension in her movements, a reflection of the conflict she felt inside. Losing her husband had been a terrible blow, and now, the stranger who had helped her also carried the weight of her people's law. She could feel the eyes of the village on her, waiting to see what she would do, and it made her anxious. She had always been strong, but the traditions of her people were powerful, and she knew that breaking them could bring shame or trouble. That morning, John made his way to the central gathering space of the village. The elders called him forward, and he could feel every gaze on him as he approached. The eldest among them, a man with silver hair and deep lines carved by years of wisdom, spoke first. His voice was calm but firm. "You have helped our widow," he said. By our law, this brings a responsibility. She is now under your protection, and you are bound to her as her husband. John swallowed hard. I understand what you are saying, but I am not from here. I do not know your customs, and I never intended to marry her. The elder's eyes met his. The law does not depend on your intentions, it depends on your actions. You have acted, and therefore the bond is formed. You must now decide whether you will honor it. John felt a mix of disbelief and frustration. He had never imagined that helping someone in need could lead to such a situation. His mind raced, trying to figure out a way to honor the woman without stepping into a life he had not chosen. But he also realized that refusing could bring shame to Naeli, and he could not bear the thought of causing her harm. Naeli stood quietly beside the elders, watching John carefully. She could see the confusion and concern in his eyes, and it gave her a small measure of hope. Perhaps he would understand her position, perhaps he would respect the law that had guided her people for generations. She knew she had little choice in the matter. Refusing the law would bring dishonor, and she could not risk her children's future or her own standing within the community. Over the next few days, John stayed in the village, trying to understand the customs that now governed his life. He learned about the importance of family, honor, and the deep connection between the people and their traditions. He saw how the community supported one another, how they worked together to survive in a harsh land, and he began to understand why the law of the widow's ride existed. It was not meant to trap or harm anyone. It was meant to ensure that widows were protected and that the community remained strong. Naeli watched John as he learned. She noticed how he treated the children with kindness, how he respected the elders, and how he did not try to impose his own ways on the people. Slowly, she began to see that he was not like other outsiders who had passed through the village. He was patient, compassionate, and willing to understand a world that was not his own. One afternoon, as John helped repair a fence on the outskirts of the village, Naeli approached him. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the dry land. "John," she said softly, using the name she had heard the settlers call him. "I know you did not ask for this. I know it is strange and difficult, but you must understand this is how our people survive. We follow the law not because it is easy, but because it keeps our families safe." John nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I understand, Naeli. I never meant to bring trouble, and I do not want to disrespect your people. I did not expect my life to change because of one simple act." She gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes life changes in ways we cannot predict. The river you helped me cross, it was not just a river, it was a path. And now we must follow it together, in a way that honors both of our worlds." Days turned into weeks, and John began to adapt to life in the village. He learned the routines, helped with daily chores, and gradually earned the trust of the elders and the community. He saw Naeli in her element, tending to her children, teaching them skills, and interacting with her neighbors with grace and authority. He admired her strength and her ability to remain calm under pressure, even when life had taken so much from her. Naeli, in turn, observed John's efforts to understand and respect her world. She saw how he listened to advice, how he asked questions instead of assuming he knew better, and how he treated her and her children with kindness. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of safety and trust, a feeling she had not experienced since her husband's death. Yet, there was also uncertainty. The law had brought them together, but that did not mean she was ready to call him her husband in her heart. She needed time to see if the bond could grow into something more than obligation. One evening, the village gathered around a fire. The elders shared stories of the past, of ancestors and traditions, of survival and honor. John listened carefully, absorbing the lessons and the history that shaped the people he had come to care for. Naeli sat beside him, watching the flames dance and listening to the stories that had guided her people for generations. There was a quiet connection between them, a recognition that their lives were now intertwined, and that respect and understanding could bridge the gap between two very different worlds. The conversation eventually turned to practical matters. John learned about the challenges the village faced, the struggle to maintain land, the threats from neighboring settlers, and the need to protect families and traditions. He realized that the bond the law had created was not just a personal matter, but a way of ensuring stability and support for the community. Helping Naeli had placed him in a position of responsibility, and he could not ignore it. Over time, John and Nayeli began to communicate more openly. Words were often simple, but their meaning was deep. They discussed the needs of her children, the daily chores of the village, and the challenges of survival in a harsh land. Through these conversations, they learned to rely on one another, to trust and respect each other's judgment. They began to see that the law that had bound them together could also be a foundation for partnership, built on mutual care and understanding rather than fear or obligation. One morning, as John helped tend to the animals near the edge of the village, Nayeli approached with her children. They brought food and water for the animals, and she smiled at John, a genuine smile that warmed him more than the sun ever could. "You are learning well," she said softly. "You do not just help because you must, you help because you care. That is different, and it matters." John felt a deep sense of relief. For the first time, he understood that his actions could be meaningful in ways he had not expected. Helping Nayeli was no longer just a duty imposed by law. It was a choice he made, a choice that reflected who he wanted to be. And Nayeli, seeing his care and respect, began to believe that perhaps their bond could be something more than obligation, that it could grow into genuine trust and friendship. Life in the village was not always easy. There were moments of doubt and misunderstanding, times when John questioned whether he belonged, and times when Nayeli wondered if she could ever truly trust someone from outside her world. But through these challenges, they learned patience and resilience. They discovered that respect and understanding were more powerful than fear, and that two people from different worlds could find common ground if they were willing to listen and learn. By the end of the second part of their story, John and Nayeli had reached a fragile but meaningful understanding. The law that had brought them together was no longer a source of tension or fear, but a bridge that allowed them to explore the possibilities of partnership. They had not yet reached love nor complete trust, but they had found mutual respect, the foundation upon which all meaningful relationships are built. As the sun set over the village, casting long shadows across the plains, John and Nayeli stood together at the edge of the settlement. The wind rustled through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and the distant sound of water. They looked out over the land, two lives intertwined by chance, by law, and by the courage to face an uncertain future. The journey ahead would not be simple, but they were ready to face it together, learning from one another, and discovering that even in unexpected circumstances, connection, respect, and understanding could grow. As the weeks passed, John Matthews began to feel more at home in the village. The routines of ranch life blended slowly with the rhythms of the Apache community. Each day he woke before the sun, tending to the animals and repairing fences, but now he also found himself helping with tasks in the village, carrying water, mending roofs, and even assisting the elders with small errands. Though these were foreign customs to him at first, John came to respect their importance. Every small task had meaning, and every action reflected the balance between people, land, and community. Nayeli watched him closely during these days. At first, she had kept her distance, cautious and uncertain about his intentions. But now she could see the care in his actions. He did not just follow the law because he had to, he helped because he wanted to. His patience and humility surprised her. He listened when elders spoke. He asked questions instead of assuming he knew better, and he treated her children gently, guiding them without forcing them. For Nayeli, who had faced loss and hardship, this was a relief. She had been strong for so long, protecting her children and keeping her family together, and seeing John respect that strength softened her skepticism. One morning, while John was mending a fence near the edge of the village, Nayeli approached with her two children. The sun had just risen, painting the plains with soft gold and casting long shadows across the land. She carried a small basket of food and handed it to John. "I thought you might be hungry," she said simply. Her voice, soft yet firm, carried a warmth that John had begun to notice in subtle ways. "Thank you," John replied, smiling. "You didn't have to, but I appreciate it." She shook her head. "We all take care of each other here. You are part of this now, whether you like it or not." John looked at her, considering her words. She was right, of course. The law had bound them together, but it was not just a rule. It was a responsibility that required understanding, respect, and care. And John found himself willing to accept it, not because he had to, but because he admired the woman and wanted to support her. Days turned into weeks, and their relationship deepened in subtle ways. They spent hours working together, sharing small moments of conversation and laughter. John began to learn bits of Naeli's language, and she began to understand more of his words and customs. Though their communication was not always perfect, the effort itself built trust. Each small exchange, sharing water for the animals, helping with chores, or even sitting quietly by the fire, brought them closer. But life in the village was not without challenges. Some of the younger members of the community whispered among themselves, questioning the presence of an outsider and the bond the law had created. They were not unkind, but they were wary. Naeli felt their gaze and occasionally frowned, concerned about how her children would perceive the situation. John, too, felt the weight of their scrutiny. Though he had always been independent, he now realized that his actions were being judged, and he had to prove himself worthy not only to Naeli, but to the entire community. One afternoon, as they were repairing a roof together, a group of settlers approached from the edge of the plains. They were curious about the village, and some were openly skeptical of John's presence there. One of the men called out, "Hey, Matthews. What are you doing hanging around those people? Isn't that dangerous?" John straightened and replied calmly, "I am helping, that is all." The man scoffed. "Helping, or are you trying to play hero? Be careful, Matthews. Not everyone will welcome your kind here." Naeli watched silently, her hands gripping the edge of the roof. She had learned to expect outsiders, but she was always cautious. She glanced at John and saw his steady gaze. He did not flinch, did not respond with anger, only with calm certainty. That moment, small though it was, impressed her deeply. He could stand firm in the face of suspicion without being cruel or arrogant, a balance she respected. Life continued with small but meaningful routines. John helped tend the animals, and Naeli managed the children and the household. They shared stories in the evenings, recounting memories from the past, dreams for the future, and thoughts about the land they both now called home. These conversations, though simple, created a bond that went beyond law or obligation. They learned about each other's struggles, hopes, and values. Slowly, John realized that he admired her not just for her strength, but for her intelligence, kindness, and resilience. Naeli, in turn, began to appreciate John's humility, courage, and willingness to understand a world so different from his own. One day, a small emergency arose. A young child from the village had wandered near the river and was in danger of slipping into the water. John and Naeli acted quickly, rushing to the edge of the river. John grabbed the child just in time, pulling him to safety, while Naeli held the other children close, comforting them. That day, the entire community saw John's courage and reliability. Naeli, standing beside him, felt a surge of gratitude and trust. She realized that while the law had brought them together, it was his character that was creating a deeper connection. In the evenings, after the work was done, John and Naeli often sat near the fire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they simply sat in silence, sharing the comfort of each other's presence. It was in these quiet moments that their bond deepened the most. Words were not always necessary. The respect, trust, and shared experience spoke louder than any conversation. The children began to respond positively to John as well. At first, they were cautious, unsure of this stranger who had entered their lives. But over time, they noticed his kindness, his patience, and his willingness to help without judgment. They laughed when he played small games with them, listened when he told simple stories, and even helped with chores when he guided them gently. Naeli watched with relief and appreciation, knowing her children were safe and supported, and that John's influence was positive and nurturing. Yet, despite the growing closeness, both John and Naeli faced moments of doubt. John sometimes wondered if he truly belonged in this community, if he could ever fully understand a world so different from his own. Naeli, too, wrestled with the tension between tradition and personal desire. The law had forced a bond upon them, but she did not yet know if love would follow. She valued independence and strength, and she was cautious about allowing anyone to come too close. One evening, a discussion arose about the future. The elders spoke of the importance of family, community, and continuity. They emphasized that relationships built on respect and understanding could endure challenges and hardships. John listened carefully, absorbing the lessons, and Naeli observed his attentiveness. She realized that he was not just learning to follow the law, he was learning to honor it with integrity, and that gave her hope. Slowly, a new feeling began to grow between them. It was subtle at first, a sense of companionship and trust that went beyond obligation. They found themselves seeking each other's opinions, sharing small jokes, and noticing each other's strengths. Naomi began to feel a quiet comfort in John's presence, and John found himself looking forward to her guidance, her insights, and the calm reassurance she provided. The relationship was not dramatic or sudden. It grew through shared experiences, small acts of kindness, and the mutual recognition of effort and respect. John admired her courage and wisdom, and Naomi admired his patience and willingness to learn. Together, they navigated the complexities of the village, the expectations of the elders, and the curiosity of outsiders. They became a team, facing challenges with cooperation rather than conflict, and slowly building a foundation of trust and understanding. By the end of this period, John and Naomi had discovered that connection could emerge even in circumstances neither had chosen. The law had brought them together, but it was their actions, their choices, and their mutual respect that allowed the bond to grow stronger. They were no longer simply bound by tradition. They were beginning to see each other as partners, capable of supporting and understanding one another in ways that went beyond obligation. As the sun set over the plains one evening, casting long shadows across the village, John and Naomi stood at the edge of the settlement. The children played nearby, and the elders watched quietly from a distance. A gentle wind carried the scent of earth and grass, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple. In that moment, they shared a look of understanding. They knew the path ahead would not be simple, but they were beginning to realize that together, they could face it with courage, respect, and perhaps even hope for something more than duty. For both John and Naomi, the days ahead would be filled with challenges, choices, and the ongoing effort to balance law, tradition, and personal connection. But the foundation had been laid. They had discovered that even in unexpected circumstances, respect, trust, and shared effort could create a meaningful bond. And as the night settled over the village, they felt a quiet assurance that their partnership, though born of obligation, had the potential to grow into something lasting and real. The weeks turned into months, and John Matthews had grown deeply accustomed to life in the village. The rhythm of the plains, the work with the animals, the chores with Naomi and her children, all of it had become familiar, even comforting. Yet the weight of the Apache law still lingered in the back of his mind. It had brought him here, but now he wondered if the bond it created could evolve into something more than duty. He had come to care for Naomi and her children, but his heart was still unsure how to express the feelings that had quietly grown within him. Naomi, too, had been thinking deeply. At first, she had worried that John's presence would remain nothing more than obligation and law. But over time, she had seen his patience, his respect, and his willingness to learn and adapt. He had not forced himself into her life. He had earned his place step by step through small acts of kindness and understanding. Her heart, which had been heavy with grief and fear of loneliness, began to open slowly. She noticed how he guided her children gently, how he treated her with respect, and how he genuinely worked to understand her world without dismissing it. For Naomi, that was worth more than any law or obligation. One morning, as John was tending to the horses near the river, Naomi came to him carrying a small basket of fresh bread. The morning light glimmered across the water, and the air smelled of grass and earth. She approached quietly, and he turned to greet her. "You've done well," she said simply, "not just with the work but with the children, the animals, and our people. I can see that you care." John smiled, brushing sweat from his forehead. "I care because it matters, because it's the right thing to do. And because you and your family deserve respect." Naomi's gaze softened. She felt something stir inside her, a recognition of the man John had become, not because he was bound by law, but because he had chosen to be kind and responsible. She realized that the law had been only the first step. What mattered now was the choices they made for themselves and each other. The elders, too, had begun to notice the change. They saw John not as an outsider bound by tradition, but as a man who had grown into the role he had been given. He listened, learned, and helped in ways that honored the community. They began to treat him with quiet respect, recognizing that he had embraced the responsibilities of the law not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine care. Naomi felt a sense of relief and pride. The approval of her people was important, but it was the recognition of her own judgment and choice that mattered most. Over the next few weeks, John and Nayeli began to share small moments that went beyond work or duty. They walked together along the trails near the river, sharing stories from their pasts, their dreams, and the small hopes that had kept them going through hard times. They laughed at simple jokes, shared meals under the wide-open sky, and even danced quietly to the sound of music from celebrations in the village. Each moment strengthened the bond that had begun with law but had grown into friendship, trust, and affection. One day, a neighboring rancher approached John with a warning. "Matthews," he said, "some of the other settlers are talking. They say a man shouldn't get so involved with the Apache. It could bring trouble." John listened carefully, then shook his head. "I appreciate the warning, but I am not just involved. I am part of this community now, and I am responsible for my actions and the people I care about. Nothing else matters." Nayeli had been nearby, and she watched him with admiration. His words were calm, firm, and unwavering. She realized that this man, who had started as a stranger, had become someone she could trust completely. His courage was quiet but strong, and it complemented her own strength in ways she had never imagined. The children, too, had begun to feel comfortable with John. They ran to him for guidance, laughed at his playful stories, and accepted his help with chores without hesitation. Nayeli watched them and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had feared that the law would bring discomfort or confusion, but instead, it had brought someone who cared for them genuinely. As the seasons changed, John and Nayeli worked together to strengthen the village and protect their land. They mended fences, planted crops, and taught the children skills they would need to survive and thrive. Each day, they discovered more about each other: the quiet courage that guided John, the wisdom and resilience that defined Nayeli, and the shared values that could bridge the worlds they came from. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together near the fire, watching the flames dance under the starlit sky. The village was quiet, the only sounds the occasional murmur of the wind and the distant call of animals. John turned to Nayeli and spoke softly. "I've been thinking this law brought me here, but it's not what keeps me here. It's you, your strength, your kindness. I want to be here because I choose to, not because I must." Nayeli looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the emotions she had kept guarded for so long. "I see that, John. I see who you are, and I know your actions are real. I trust you. I trust you not because the law says I must, but because you have earned it." It was a quiet moment, yet it spoke volumes. The law that had bound them together had served its purpose, but it was their mutual respect, care, and growing affection that now defined their relationship. They had moved beyond obligation into choice, and the bond between them had deepened naturally, honestly, and with integrity. In the weeks that followed, John formally acknowledged the law through the village elders, participating in the ceremonial rituals that made their bond official in the eyes of the community. Nayeli stood beside him, calm and composed, her children close at hand. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, filled with symbols of respect, unity, and protection. The villagers watched with approval, seeing that the union was not just a legal formality but a partnership built on trust and understanding. Life together began in earnest. John and Nayeli worked side by side, raising her children, managing the ranch, and participating in village life. Their days were long and filled with hard work, but also moments of quiet laughter, shared meals, and simple joys. They found companionship in each other, a sense of partnership that grew stronger with each challenge they faced. Over time, the affection between them became more evident. It was not the sudden, dramatic love of a storybook, but something steadier, deeper, and more lasting. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate with a glance, and to support each other through difficulties. Nayeli found comfort in John's strength and reliability, and John found inspiration in her wisdom and courage. Together, they were stronger than they had been alone. One afternoon, while working in the fields, John paused and looked at Nayeli. She was laughing with the children, her hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright and warm. He realized that this woman, who had once been a stranger in need, had become the center of his world. His heart, which had once been cautious and uncertain, now felt full and steady. He knew that the law had brought them together, but it was their actions, choices, and care that had created a real connection. Nayeli noticed him watching her and smiled. It was a small, genuine smile, free of hesitation or doubt. In that moment, they both understood that their bond was no longer defined by obligation. It was defined by trust, respect, and the quiet love that had grown from shared experiences, challenges, and understanding. The seasons changed again, bringing new challenges and joys. Together, they faced harsh weather, cared for the animals, and guided the children through their lessons and play. They celebrated small victories, good harvests, healthy animals, and the laughter of children, and they supported each other through difficulties, knowing that together they were stronger. By the end of this chapter of their lives, John and Nayeli had created a life that blended two worlds. They honored the traditions of the Apache, respected the community, and embraced the values that had guided them both. Yet they also forged something new, a partnership built not on law alone, but on understanding, care, and choice. They had discovered that even obligations imposed by custom could evolve into meaningful relationships when approached with respect and compassion. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the plains glowed with the soft colors of twilight, John and Nayeli stood together, watching the children play nearby. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, the sky shimmered with stars, and the village was peaceful. They shared a look of understanding and contentment, knowing that they had found something rare and valuable. The story that had begun with a simple act of kindness, a ride across a river, had grown into a journey of trust, respect, and love. John and Nayeli had learned that connection could emerge even in the most unexpected circumstances. The law had brought them together, but it was their actions, choices, and shared experiences that had made their bond real. And so, life continued on the plains. The days were long, the work was hard, but there was joy, companionship, and hope. John and Nayeli had discovered that when two people approach each other with respect, patience, and care, even the most unusual circumstances can lead to a life filled with trust, partnership, and lasting affection. Together, they faced the future with courage and confidence, ready to meet whatever challenges came their way, side by side. In the end, the river that had once seemed like a simple obstacle had become a symbol of connection. The law that had seemed like a burden had become a bridge, and the lives of John and Nayeli had intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. Their story was a testament to the power of respect, understanding, and the quiet strength of human connection. A story that began with an unexpected act of kindness and grew into a life of partnership, hope, and enduring love.